with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, June 9th, 2022. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, John Huntington, author of Far-Right Vanguard, The Radical Roots of Modern Conservatism. Meanwhile, the House has passed a gun control bill banning sales of semi-automatic weapons for those under 21 and banning large-capacity magazines, but the bill is DOA in the Senate. In a ruling yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled to protect many law enforcement officers who work for the federal government from civil rights lawsuits. You heard that right. That means Customs and Border Patrol agents who abuse migrants, or anybody, you're good to go. Donald Trump and 2 of his kids are penciled in to be questioned under oath by the New York AG in July. 2 Omicron subvariants, BA4 and BA5, have been spreading in the U.S. and will likely be dominant by the fall, experts say. Trader Joe's workers in western Massachusetts have filed seeking an election to become the company's first unionized store. The ACLU has filed a lawsuit on behalf of 3 families of trans kids and an LGBTQ organization, challenging Texas Governor Greg Abbott's directive to investigate parents seeking gender-affirming care for their kids. There are 9 families of trans kids currently under investigation in Texas. It's just... And lastly, police have arrested a man allegedly traveling to Brett Kavanaugh's home to kill him. We should probably retrofit his house so there is only one point of entry. I stole that from Matt, who stole that from Twitter.
Yep.
All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Hope everybody is having a lovely Thursday. Before we get into some of the heartbreaking testimony from the children and the parents in Uvalde, I want to highlight this Supreme Court ruling because, as I mentioned in headlines, I mean, it's just, this is like soft fascism, and maybe I'm being generous by saying soft. It allows for a specific large subset of federal agents, essentially really more targeted towards Customs and Border Protection agents, to act with impunity. Mark Joseph Stern wrote this up in Slate. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court abolished individuals' ability to sue Customs and Border Protection agents who violate their constitutional rights. In the process, the conservative supermajority came close to smothering lawsuits against all federal officers who defied the Constitution, granting them near impenetrable immunity. So, I mean, there are tens of thousands of Customs and Border Patrol agents, and already migrants, people crossing the border trying to seek asylum. I mean, you've seen the images. They already face insane abuse. But now the Supreme Court is ruling you're not going to have recourse because this is in the interest of national security, essentially. Wednesday's case, Egbert v. Boll, is the latest and most thorough attack on accountability for federal agents who break the law. The decision arises from a loophole in the federal statute that lets individuals sue law enforcement for damages. This statute authorizes suits against state law enforcement officers who infringe on civil rights. Sheriffs, local cops, highway patrol, all can be sued in federal court for constitutional violations. But the statute does not authorize such suits against law enforcement officers who work for the federal government. The Supreme Court addressed this problem in 1971's Bivens v. 6 Unknown Named Agents of Federal Bureaus of Narcotics, which involved a claim of excessive force against federal agents. And conservatives have been essentially trying to go after this ruling for a long time. The court has insisted that the precedent applies only when the facts of the case are nearly identical to Bivens. So in theory, when federal agents use excessive force, they still can be sued. But if that force takes place in some, quote, new context, with, quote, special factors, aka if it's not essentially identical to the precedent, say some connection to national security, as I mentioned earlier, the suit will fail. And because there is invariably some distinction between two cases, naturally, courts usually had an excuse to toss out Bivens' claims. And so Clarence Thomas basically wrote this up in the Supreme Court and moved the goalposts. He replaced the standard, Stern writes, with an even more stringent one. Judges hearing Bivens' claims, he wrote for the court, should now simply ask whether there is any reason to think that Congress might be better equipped to create a damages remedy. Basically, though, what it comes down to, in this case that was brought, a federal agent allegedly used excessive force against an American citizen on American soil, the precise scenario to which Bivens ostensibly applies. So it did meet that initial criteria that this is the same thing as the precedent, so you should, in theory, if you were acting in good faith as a Supreme Court justice, which we know they're not, they should be identical. But no, Thomas wrote, because the incident occurred so close to Canada, it was on the Canadian border, it has, quote, implications for national security and border security. As a result, greenlighting Boulet's lawsuit would constitute a, quote, judicial intrusion into Congress's policy-making role. So that's where this opens up this massive can of worms. So tens of thousands of Border Patrol agents, since it was involving the Canadian border in this instance, are going to have the ability to act with even more impunity than they do. We saw images of them using reins as whips, essentially. Hey, if that happens to you, you probably don't have any legal recourse based on the Supreme Court.
This is within a 100-mile border exclusion zone, and if you don't know if you're within that border zone, you might want to look at this map here, which is like if you're near any sort of water or coastline, so you know the entire coasts, all major cities on the coasts are all within this. Even like the Great Lakes area, which I didn't know that this. It seems bizarre that like Chicago is considered on the border, but it's on the border, I guess.
Yeah. So just another. Yeah, go on.
Just to say one more thing, it's like this is. You can say what fascism. This is making border agents an American Gestapo, and it means that if they find a reason to go into your house for whatever reason that they want, that they'll have a legal precedent that they could cite saying, actually, we're just doing this because of national security.
Exactly. With that said, let's turn to the congressional hearings on Uvalde. This is a clip of Maya Cirillo. She is a survivor of the Uvalde massacre, and she testified to the House Oversight Committee on what happened on that awful day. She thankfully survived, but her friends, her teacher did not. And she described what happened to her via video call to the House Oversight Committee.
And then she got an email. And then she went to go lock the door, and he was in the hallway, and they made eye contact. And then she went back in the room and she told us, go hide. And then we went to go hide behind my teacher's desk and behind the backpacks. And then he shot the little window, and then he went to the other classroom. And then there's a door between our classrooms, and he went through there and shot my teacher and told my teacher goodnight and shot her in the head. And then he shot some of my classmates and the whiteboard. When I went to the barracks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and put it all over me. And
what did you do then when you put the blood on yourself?
just stayed quiet, and then I got my teacher's phone and called 911.
And what did you tell 911?
I told her that we need help and to send the police in our classroom.
If there was something that you want people to know about that day and about you, right? Or things that you want different, what would it be?
To have security.
Do you feel safe at school? Why not?
Because I don't want it to happen again.
And you think it's going to happen again?
So, she's
right.
She's right. She describes, if you didn't hear that, smearing blood on her to pretend she was dead. That you might have read that in some of the news reports. Using her teacher's phone to dial 911. She'll be traumatized for life. I mean, I'm just thank God she's alive, right? But she's gonna have to deal with this for her life, as are the families, the parents of the victims. It's not just the 19 who died, or was it 19? And I forget the exact number. At least 19. It's gonna be their families who deal with these ramifications. And last night, Biden was on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and Jimmy Kimmel asked him about what he can do, essentially. And Biden said, quote, on gun control executive orders, that he doesn't want to, quote, emulate Trump's abuse of the Constitution.
Insulting.
It's being an institutionalist is not like an actual moral compass. Believing in
it's the opposite.
It's frankly, it's the opposite. But it is it ascribes a artificial moral justification for you to do nothing in the wake of these massacres. And it's not just Uvalde. Buffalo happened, and shootings happened after that as well. It's cowardice that you ascribe some sort of like highfalutin justification in order to sleep at night. But, Obama was saying the same stuff, I remember, in the wake of Sandy Hook about what cannot be done via executive order because of the Constitution. Maybe, he had some sort of futuristic vision, and he was able to see that he didn't want to, in the past, emulate Trump via executive order, right? That makes sense. It's just, I mean, come on. FDR was unyielding in his use of his executive authority to make people's lives better. That's your responsibility as a leader, not to put institutions first and norms, which is like not really what he's doing. He's just hiding from it.
The Constitution is a slave driver's document, and it shouldn't be respected. Like, I mean, I understand that politicians have to operate within this, but like, you can't over dead kids say that you're gonna be being paying fealty to the Constitution. It's ridiculous.
Well, also, I think you're right in the sense that this is probably not his intention, but at the end of the day, does the intention really matter when he's basically saying the mores on Capitol Hill matter more than dead kids?
Yeah.
It's the same end result, regardless of whether he means it or not.
Exactly. That is what you're supposed to do as a politician. You're supposed to make people's lives better, and frankly, I don't really, I don't have having affection for and fealty to documents and institutions and norms is giving way too much credibility to, yes, slave drivers, as Matt said, to racists, to a document that was created by wealthy white landowners and skewed towards their perspective. We live in this current reality. And frankly, I don't even think the Constitution says anything about this, but we live in a current context. And your job on this tiny, tiny time you have on Earth, Joe Biden, and this tiny, tiny time that you're in power, is to do everything you can to make people's lives better and not to shrink in cowardice and pretend it's some sort of institutional norm situation. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be joined by John Huntington. We are back, and we are joined now by John Huntington, author of Far-Right Vanguard, The Radical Roots of Modern Conservatism. John, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So your book focuses on the far right in its origins and in the United States. And what struck me as interesting and refreshing, frankly, is that you did not start your book in, the Nixon era or the Reagan era, where I feel like a lot of modern retrospectives about the conservative movement, they often fall in that. It fall into that, and I think it misses the broader scope of the fundamental extremist foundations of the conservative movement that we're still, frankly, living with to this day. Mm-hmm. Was that a deliberate choice on your part to because you saw that there was maybe a gap in some academia on some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the kind words. A gap in academia is exactly how I would phrase it. So I do think that there was kind of this tendency amongst academics, and there are people who have written on this since the Trump years about how academics sort of focused on people like William Buckley, Ronald Reagan, the polite faces on the conservative movement who kind of brought conservatism to the broader population. And in doing so, when they focus on those people, they lose a little bit of the anger and the resentment and the racism that helped push conservatism into the political mainstream to begin with. And so I tried to kind of reverse the order, focus on the groundswell happening on the bottom of radicals, conspiracy theorists, white supremacists, and how they were the ones doing the organizing and the signature drives, and they were the ones knocking on doors. And as I call them the vanguard of the movement very purposefully for that reason.
Well, I want to send your book to Joe Biden and have him and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of Democratic leadership, because all we hear is that the Republican Party is not Trump. They're not Trump. There are respectable Republicans out there. And I mean, your book, it just illustrates how that's preposterous. There always were these elements in the Republican Party, even going back to the outset of the 20th century.
Absolutely. And conservatism, as a political ideology, spanned both parties for many years, right? Southern Democrats and the segregationist wing of that party. And so when people like, I guess, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi talk about working with the other side in our very polarized era, they're talking about a form of politics that just doesn't exist anymore. Back in the day, you could have liberals and conservatives being both in both parties, but that just isn't the way things are today. And so the gridlock is much more apparent in our modern era.
So let's start, I guess, at the outside of the 20th century, the beginning there. You know, the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, I think, is a essential part or place to start, basically. But also the opposition to the New Deal as well. Talk about where you started your book, and some of the confluence of different factions within the conservative movement in opposition to the New Deal, as I say, and also the rise of far-right white militia groups like
Sure.
the renewed Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely. The early 20th century is very, very important for the rise of conservatism, especially the 1920s, I think, were a really important moment because you have this renewed fundamentalist vigor, fighting against evolution being taught in public schools. You've got the rise of the Second Klan and the nativism and racism that brought to the forefront. And that version of the Klan had some 1 to 3 million members, including men of society, politicians. It was not, just a bunch of ex-Confederates in the backwoods. I mean, this was a real legitimate movement. And then when you build into the 1930s, when Franklin Roosevelt becomes president and starts instituting the New Deal, empowering labor, creating larger government programs, it kind of consolidates a large amount of the conservative, I guess, opposition to the New Deal. You have businessmen who don't want empowered unions. You have Southern segregationists who don't like the fact that, Black and brown people are getting government benefits or are getting government jobs, and that might, prevent them from being exploited in ways that they had historically. You have, conspiracy theorists who believe that Franklin Roosevelt is going to bring communism to America. And there was also legitimate fascist movements happening in the 1930s, the German-American Bund, the Silver Shirts. And so all of this together is this broader kind of conservative ecosystem that was trying to fight against New Deal liberalism and the advent of, or the implementation of social democracy in America.
Were they as coordinated as they became later in history, or was this really kind of different factions, which again you can totally extrapolate onto modern day anti-communism, the racists, and the anti-labor part of conservative, or I guess you can put the anti-communist, anti-labor together, but based on FDR's success and popularity, and again that was that had to do obviously with factors, the depression as well, but outside of the conservatives' control. But were they not as organized as you would say as they became decades later?
That's a really interesting question. And in terms of kind of the themes of conservatism, I will say the song very much remains the same. But I would definitely argue that they do become more consolidated later for a number of different reasons. In the 1930s, the conservative movement that I write about is a little bit more disconnected, right? You had guys like, for example, there was a group called the Jeffersonian Democrats, and their whole goal was what they would view it as redeeming their Democratic Party. They didn't like Roosevelt. They felt like he had perverted their party. And so their main goal was just to get him off the ticket and get a real conservative on there. But Roosevelt was so popular that they struggled to do this. So instead, they pivoted to actually supporting the Republican, who himself was kind of like a moderate to even liberal sometimes guy named Alfred Landon. And so as a result, their politics was very much centered on getting rid of Roosevelt. Later on, the conservative movement will coalesce in a way that they will eventually take over the Republican Party, right? And that's where figures like Barry Goldwater and even William Buckley, become important because they are spearheading a broader conservative coalition than the ones in the 30s and 40s.
So can we talk a bit more about the second coming of the Ku Klux Klan, and how that fit into, particularly, what was it, 1915, when they were founded once again, into that time Birth of a Nation comes out. Mm-hmm. We were chatting about this before the show, and Matt, our producer, was saying that some people call the Klan the first real U.S. fascist organization in the United States. Is that a fair assessment? And perhaps that you can draw comparisons to the present as well.
So I am not necessarily a scholar of fascism, but I do think that there are notes of fascism certainly within the Ku Klux Klan, the authoritarian inclinations, the calls to replenish America somehow. Not to put too fine a point on it, but make America great again is very much we need to renew, we need a renaissance in this country, and that's what the Klan was offering, and they very much clung both to the flag and to the cross at the same time, using Christianity and patriotism as a way to otherize certain people, whether it was immigrants or Black Americans or whomever, to create a wider nation, or at least a nation in which white people had all the power. And so I do think that there is an element of fascism in that. A lot of those notes are very similar. And part of the problem with the fascism conversation, which I'm sure if you guys on Twitter are know very well, it's been debated very much by academics. Part of the problem is that many people will only say, well, if it wasn't Nazi Germany or Mussolini's Italy, then it can't be fascism. But I think that misses the point of political culture, right? A culture of violence, a culture that says that we need to bring America back to when it was great, usually, which means a wider, more restrictive, less democratic America. These very much are the same sort of appeals that previous fascists have made, and I do think that there is that connection is warranted.
And in conjunction with, say, the first Red Scare movement in around the same period in response to the Russian Revolution, can you explain what that looked like in America around 100 years ago, and how that was fundamental to conservatism at that time?
Absolutely. It's the Russian Revolution happens in 1917, kicking out the Tsar and really overthrowing the government the provisional government that took over after the Tsar, after the February Revolution. And for Americans, particularly of the conservative variety, they viewed that as this left-wing movement that was being led by the Bolsheviks as overthrowing an order that had existed for generations. And so to them, communism, in its international kind of revolutionary character, became an explicit threat. But communism also became a very useful strategic tool for conservatives. You could just paint any of your opponents as a communist, even if it's not true, and kind of those accusations had purchased back then. You had a lot of labor strikes going on in that era and in previous eras that sometimes turned violent, and people would say, okay, well, those guys are just communists. And it was a way to turn people against progressive movements. And so anti-communism not only became a widely held belief, but also a strategic tool for conservatives to demonize opponents that they didn't like or that they felt were, taking America in the wrong direction.
How did this, and I want to, we can move a little bit later in history, but I'm fascinated by this time period. How did women's suffrage play into these dynamics as well?
Now, that's an interesting question. And certainly for the Klan used white women as something to be defended. The Klan often would use white women as a symbol, this purity of America, and thus, women in this case were reduced to to an object, something delicate and pure that needed to be defended by brave white men. Particularly, and often the Klan, of course, would use all sorts of vulgar language, insinuating that black men were trying to take advantage of white women, and so women, for those types of people, it was essential to their politics. Nancy MacLean wrote a great book on this called "Behind the Mask of Chivalry," talking about how the chivalry of the Klan. They say they're defending white women, but in a way, it also kind of masked their violence and the anger that I think undergirded their movement.
Yes, that makes a ton of sense. You mentioned briefly the Jeffersonian Democrats. Could you talk a little bit more about both James Reed, I think he founded the Jeffersonian Democrats, if I'm not mistaken, and how he led an opposition to FDR using a lot of those prongs that we've previously discussed of racism, anti-communism as well, as a not the Republican, but the conservative opposition to FDR.
Yeah, James Reed is one of those kind of forgotten characters in American political history. He was a Missouri senator, and his big claim to fame as Missouri's senator was torpedoing the League of Nations under Woodrow Wilson. Wilson, of course, wanted to form this big international alliance after World War I, and using a lot of racist demagoguery, Reed helped torpedo it, despite the fact that Reed was from Wilson's party, showing that there were conservatives and progressives within the Democratic Party. And then after his Senate years, Reed kind of goes back to Missouri and starts practicing in a private law firm. But then when FDR comes to power, he feels compelled, like he has to, to save the Democratic Party from itself, that they are going down the wrong path. And so in his mind, the key figure that he pulls a lot of his ideas from is Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, of course, the writer of the Declaration of Independence, but also a slaveholder, and also not exactly a person who wanted everybody to be able to vote, despite the language of all men are created equal. And so when Reed and other Jeffersonian Democrats are talking about kind of redeeming the Democratic Party, what they're talking about is going back in time. This is a reactionary movement, right? A movement saying we've gone too far here and we need to turn back the clock to this previous era, an era that had less democracy, an era where more people knew their place in society. And Reed's movement, the Jeffersonian Democrats, spread into basically every state in the nation. Texas had a very prominent chapter. The guy that ran it was a guy named J. Evetts Haley, who's going to be a figure in kind of a fringe figure, but a figure nonetheless in conservative politics all the way up through the Reagan era. In fact, an interesting note is that that Haley who was a Texas cattleman. He got involved with the Jeffersonian Democrats, wrote a book against Lyndon Johnson in 1964, and then served as a delegate for Ronald Reagan. So literally just like that trajectory of going from radical to mainstream over the course of his lifetime.
That's poetic, right? You could almost trace that and trace your book along with it. How successful were they in? Did they get any gains in opposition to FDR and beyond, the Jeffersonian Democrats?
Not really. I often joke that my book is a book of losers. It's a book about losers because many of their elections, they just don't win. These guys put together third-party candidates. So, for example, in 1944, there was a group called the Texas Regulars that wanted to get FDR off the ticket. They failed. There was the Dixiecrat Revolt in 1948. They succeeded in some states, but failed largely to get their message out. George Wallace, 1968, loses. And so these guys are all losing. But the important thing is not necessarily the losses, but the fact that at each step of the way, the web is tightening, right? Or the web is growing and the connections are tightening. They're getting to know each other. They're forming organizations. They're getting involved in each other's organizations. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination, and much of it revolves around the activism that they create during these moments, right? In 1956, for example, there was a candidate named T. Coleman Andrews who hilariously was actually working in Eisenhower's administration as the IRS's main guy, then quits. And then after he leaves government, he turns into an anti-tax advocate and runs in 1956 under a third-party banner. He only gets like 100,000 votes. But the important thing is that at all of the third-party activism that was going on brings a lot of these guys together. They have conferences in Chicago, and they're all meeting and speaking and getting to know one another. And that's where the real important stuff is happening.
So as these connections begin to form, the web of modern conservatism is forming as well. You can also see how these webs of connections give birth to organizations eventually, like the John Birch Society and other conservative infrastructure that's still to this day, they can flex their muscle quite effectively. And would you argue that during maybe the 40s and 50s, that is an essential time period for the formation and consolidation of that kind of organized conservative activism?
Absolutely. I think the 50s are a critical era. I think in my book, I think the title of that chapter is called The Cauldron, because it's this moment where anti-communism now has purchased across all of American society. Even presidents like Truman and Eisenhower are bent on, declare themselves anti-communists. Truman implements loyalty programs. And so as a result, this emboldens and it legitimizes a lot of the things that the far right have been saying. They've been saying that the government's been full of communists for 20 years at this point, and now they can say, see, we told you. Not to mention, Joseph McCarthy and all of his witch hunting and all this stuff. And so absolutely. And what's interesting is that in the modern day, the Birch Society has gotten a lot of attention, rightfully so. They still exist. But what I think is interesting is that the Birch Society, to me, wasn't the beginning of the far-right movement or even the beginning of, the modern conservative movement, but more so kind of a culmination of a moment, because the far-right had been building since the New Deal era. And then in 1958, when the Birch Society is created, it's this moment where Robert Welch, the founder, decides, well, the far-right has been so disconnected for so long, we need to have a central kind of clearinghouse organization. And that's what the Birch Society became. Was this big organization, boasting at least 100,000 members, maybe more. They never released their membership rolls, so we don't really know how many people there were. But the important thing about the Birchers is that not only do they provide kind of a central meeting ground, like a point of convergence, but also they just do things. Right. William Buckley isn't out there knocking on doors and getting people to sign signature drives. Right. He's writing op-eds in National Review, whereas Birchers are going out there and knocking on doors, asking people to sign signature drives, registering voters. Those are the people who are spearheading this conservative movement. And that's, to me, why the far right is so important.
In their ground game, and in the fact that, as you mentioned, at this point, it's just anti-communism is ubiquitous. And that, would you say that that's an indication of maybe a canary in the coal mine for early rhetorical wins by the conservatives? Because that's a consensus by this time period.
Absolutely. And I think you guys would probably agree that I would argue that conservatives for a long time have been better at messaging than liberals or leftists or Democrats or whomever. They're just so good at winning those rhetorical battles. And I think anti-communism was one of those moments. Now, in fairness, they did get kind of like a leg up because with the Soviet Union and the post-World War II era making communism kind of this focal point, it really legitimized and kind of fueled the far right's rhetoric. And like I said, it made them seem like they were telling the truth, or at the very least that there was something there. And of course, we haven't even really touched on it, but a lot of this anti-communism, though, does lead to conspiracy thinking. That there's this big bad enemy that's kind of pulling all the strings.
Well, John Birch was instrumental in mainstreaming that as well.
Absolutely. Robert Welch, wrote a book throughout the 1950s, and finally he started sending it to people like William Buckley and others. And in his book, it's called The Politician. He basically accuses Eisenhower of being a communist, like the D-Day guy. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, oh, Eisenhower's a communist. And it's just this ridiculous characterization, but he stacks the facts just right to where if you squint at it, you're like, oh, maybe,
Right. And you mentioned Buckley. That's probably important to start talking about his influence, right? I did another interview maybe a year ago. God, all of this blends in my mind, frankly. But Buckley later kind of tried to distance himself from John Birch, but he was, I think, talking out of both sides of his mouth to that degree, because it's another example of this desire, this impulse to say there's a distinction between the crazies and the Mitt Romneys or whatever. But frankly, it's a symbiotic relationship, and Buckley was very much involved, or at least, kind of working alongside the Birchers and the crazies. What did you in your research find in terms of that relationship? And is my characterization accurate, frankly?
No, I do think your characterization is accurate. And I think this is one of the key areas in which historians have not done a great job of telling the history of the conservative movement, because historians often focused on guys like Buckley. And of course, Buckley wanted to draw those lines of respectability and would say, oh, no, we're not like those guys. And historians picked up on that and then wrote these books about this respectable conservative movement, and that there were these rigid definitions, and that the crazies and the kooks were over here, and these guys are legitimate. But the problem is that that's not reality. There was a lot of overlap, and continues to be a lot of overlap. The conservative movement is a big tent, and all the boundaries that might exist, all the words that we use to describe various types of conservatives, those boundaries are very porous. Just to give you an example, in the 1950s, when Robert Welch was writing his book, he corresponded with Berkeley. The guy Roger Millikan, one of the key funders of National Review, Buckley's magazine, Roger Millikan was a Birch Society member. Robert Welch donated $2,000 to National Review to help get it off the ground in the early 50s. And in fact, the very views that Buckley had aren't all that dissimilar from what the far right was saying. Very infamously, in 1957, Buckley wrote an article in National Review talking about race in the South, and argued that the white race he called white people the advanced race. Those were his exact words, and said that as a result, they have a right to rule. And so it's like, how is that any different from what Southern segregationists are saying?
Right.
It's the exact same thing.
Well, that's a good opportunity to talk about, since we are in this time period, the civil rights era, and how this plays into this. Brown v. Board in the 50s. I'm forgetting exactly what year that was. Or no.
54. You're in.
54. Okay, good. I'm terrible with dates, honestly. But this is happening right at the same time period. So there's just like it was decades before, there's the Klan and the anti-communism elements, and there's the racism and the continued anti-communism elements. How was this time period of conservatism? It seems obvious, but maybe it's not. Developing itself in opposition to Black people and to civil rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the various obvious opposition, right? The people who just don't want segregation to end. And in 1954, there's all sorts of pushback. There's the Southern Manifesto that gets written, I believe, in 1956 by a bunch of congressmen who all sign it and basically say that, the state is, has its boot on our neck, more or less. And of course, then you see guys running for Congress or for president, even George Wallace. But what I find so interesting about this moment is that there are rhetorical shifts that start happening in the 50s and 60s, because at a certain point, in some states you can still be an overt racist, but in a lot of states you can't anymore. And so at a certain point, the conservatives sort of dial back the racism and shift to what they would call like what some scholars would call like dog whistle politics, or even like colorblind conservatism. This idea that they start talking about states' rights and other forms of other things that, if you kind of scratch at that surface, it's still the same old racism. It's still trying to keep Jim Crow around, but not with the blunt racism of the 30s and 40s per se. And again, that's generalizing, but I do think that was happening. So
let's now move to Richard Nixon's run in 1962, because this probably does inform, some of the ahistorical division between the Birchers, the crazies, and the respectable Republicans, because he does try to draw that line himself, not particularly successfully, or make that division. What does his run in 62 say to you about reflect on that time?
Sure. So in 1962, of course, Richard Nixon running for a dog. In 1962, Richard Nixon is running for the California governorship, and very much tries to draw a line between himself and the Birchers. The Birchers were very, very powerful and large in California. They had control of or at least very influential, and I believe it was called the California Republican Assembly, the CRA. And basically, when he drew that line and said, I am not like those guys, and in fact, we need to distance ourselves from these radicals, they basically made it their life's mission to never let Nixon get elected. And in 62, it works, right? Nixon loses in 1962. And that's where the famous quote to the media, you don't have Nixon to kick around anymore. And he huffs off from his press conference. But the point is that Nixon realized something. He had essentially touched the third rail. And the third rail of the conservative movement is the far right. They're the ones who are driving the bus, even if he didn't realize it at the time. And so when he comes back in 1968 and runs for president again, he's much more conservative. He does not make those distinctions as readily. He uses the phrase law and order. Again, that's a great example of that dog whistle politicking. It's not racism, but white people knew what he meant, you know? And so, yeah, absolutely. I think that Nixon learned that lesson in 1962 and then corrected it in 68.
And Goldwater kind of learned, and he was more successful in representing both poles of the Republican Party.
Yeah, and Goldwater was absolutely part of the far right. They viewed him as one of their own. And that's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about historians when they started writing history books about conservatism in the 90s. Goldwater played a huge role as this kind of beginning moment. And to me, Goldwater is not even the beginning, but really the culmination. This was the far right believed that they had made it. In 1964, the Republican Party had its convention in San Francisco, and there were Birchers on the ground floor. And when Nelson Rockefeller, the famous New York liberal, got up to speak to the Republican delegates and was trying to say that we need to move away from this extremism, he literally gets drowned out by boos and by chants of "We want Barry." And so the far right believed this was our moment. And then, of course, Goldwater gets absolutely obliterated in that election.
Right.
And so for some people, they're like, okay, well, the far right is maybe too much of a liability. But I think that's the wrong lesson. I think the actual lesson that they took from it is we can't be overtly extreme, but we still need those votes. And so they have to figure out a way to kind of thread that needle. And that's where I think the law and order rhetoric comes from, and these sorts of things. They figure out that way to phrase their politics in such a way that appeals to both mainstream and the far right.
So is that a lesson they take from the shellacking that Johnson gives to Goldwater? Or, I mean, what were some of the lessons learned there?
So in the immediate aftermath of Goldwater, I'm talking like the days afterwards, people all over the newspapers in the country were basically declaring conservatism was dead, that this was the end of conservatism, that Goldwater had shown that this was a cul-de-sac, right, a political dead end. But William Buckley, in one of his columns, said that he thinks that the grave diggers were premature. He didn't think it was over. And the reason why is because the movement had been built to the point where it could sustain itself. It wasn't just that you could topple over one candidate and that was the end of it. There was still a sustained conservative movement on the ground level being led in part by the far right, and at the top level being led by periodicals like National Review. And so to Buckley, the lesson was we need to kind of refine our rhetoric, and we need to figure out a way to still get our politics across while maybe moderating our language.
Well, and it ends up paying dividends for them later. It is interesting when talking about Goldwater. I can't help but think about like Hillary Clinton embracing, what did she call herself, a Goldwater girl?
Goldwater girls, yeah.
When she was younger.
Right, right when she was younger, and she worked for him, if I'm not mistaken. At the outset of her political career, basically. And what maybe this is a bit transitioning to the present, but it's amazing how conservatives have been so successful at normalizing their extremism, and until very recently, particularly in the 90s and after, getting like 80% of what they wanted included in democratic speak and embrace in the form of neoliberalism, frankly, but and also in welfare reform under Clinton. Like, they won so thoroughly. The culmination of all of their work and organizing, frankly, paid dividends, not just in terms of like Reagan's landslides and the tax cuts, but the embrace of a lot of the platform in the opposition party.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, and the Democrats, rather than they never quite returned to the liberalism of the mid 20th century. They just figured, well, that's over. We can't do that anymore. That's not where the politics, the general American public is. And so they've shifted to this, the triangulation, the neoliberal era that we still continue to live in. What's interesting, though, is that conservatives are never quite, and I think this is true for any political ideology, but conservatives are never satisfied with the person that they have in power. Reagan's a great example. Reagan cut taxes. Reagan crushed unions. Reagan stripped away regulation, so very much an economic, the libertarian economics, the swaggering foreign policy, but the religious right felt betrayed by Reagan. They didn't think that he did enough for them. And it's fascinating because now the religious right very much feels like Trump is there, that Trump will do what they want him to do. I mean, look at the Supreme Court, right? And so it's, but yet Trump is not, there are still conservatives who believe that Trump is not doing enough or didn't do enough in his presidency.
Yeah, there's an ideological discipline on the right in terms of the way that the base can flex its muscle that is just absent currently on the left, frankly. I mean, it's getting better, but it's nowhere near the apparatus that has been, as you write. I mean, it's been 100 years in the making, honestly.
When I think part of the problem is that the conservative movement has so much more financial heft available. They have billionaires who will just funnel money into think tanks and periodicals, and whereas the left doesn't necessarily have that at their disposal. And it's also hard, especially if you're from a left-wing mindset, to support a party that seems to punch left all the time.
Yeah.
And so as a result, it always feels like the Democrats, the kind of left-wing side of the political spectrum, is so much more fractured. It also has the harder time of trying to be a big tent. Nowadays the Democratic coalition is a lot creakier because it's just a bigger tent in many ways, and there's a lot more factions within it. And so it's difficult, what the Democrats are trying to do. But this goes back to the rhetoric, and I agree with you that the right is much, much more disciplined, because even back in the 50s and 60s, they would recognize that, Nixon's not perfect, but he's better than that guy. And so they would vote for him and then use that as a stepping stool up to the next big victory. And the left just doesn't have that. And there's a lot of different reasons why, but I think that is true.
Well, I mean, I could rant about the Democratic Party until I keeled over. But, I mean, I do want to just emphasize how your book just makes it so clear that the battles that we're seeing, or not even the battles, but the factions within the current conservative movement, it's really nothing new. Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Mitt Romney, I mean, that is the same big tent that you describe. And so to bring it back to where we really started our conversation, it's super clear to me that they might be different shades within the same enemy. I mean, I perceive the right as an enemy, but they are one and the same. And so I think that's fundamental to understanding the enemy, is not to say, oh, that we want to go back to the good old days when there were respectable Republicans, like Goldwater or like William F. Buckley, who all were this. It's just the same thing. It's just we don't have the historical literacy to understand that in this country, frankly.
I think what Pelosi and others fail to realize is that the difference between the radical conservatives and the mainstream conservatives, it's a difference of degree, but not kind, right? They're part of the same movement, but many times they're advocating for the same things, maybe just using different language.
Exactly. All right. Well, can't thank you enough. John Huntington, you can check out his book, Far-Right Vanguard, The Radical Roots of Modern Conservatism. John, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right, folks, with that, we are going to head into the fun half. I'm going to be taking your calls, reading your IMs. Binder and Branding will join us. But
At
Matt,
some point, I would think.
Yes. But Matt, what happened on Left Reckoning last night?
Yeah, we had Kurt Hackbarth on yesterday evening to talk about AMLO not appearing at the Summit of American States righteously, and the retaliation. We updated. Basically, Ilhan Omar signed a letter saying that AMLO doesn't care about journalists dying. That was really, in my opinion, and the opinion of Kurt Hackbarth, our guest, something that Congress put together to discipline AMLO for not appearing at the Joe Biden, Jair Bolsonaro Summit of American Democracy or whatever they're calling it. And it was bad of Ilhan to do. So we talked about that last night. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We also talk about trailer park oligarchs who own too many, and then alternative models of ownership there, and the Fed coming to suppress wages. And also we had our first summer stream where the post game wasn't just for members. We streamed it on Twitch last night, and Ben Burgess joined us for that. So you can get that for free. Actually, the post game is free on Twitch right now. You can go watch the replay.
Whoa.
So twitch.tv/Left Reckoning. Go subscribe if you subscribe on Twitch.
All right, we'll head into the fun half before they join us. But definitely check out Doomed, check out Scam Economy, and check out The Discourse. Those are great shows from our friends Brandon and Matt Binder. We'll be getting into it. Maybe we'll be talking a bit more about that drag show for kids controversy with Binder and more. We'll be taking your calls and reading your IMs. 646-257-39. Wait, I tried to do that by memory and then I second guessed myself.
646-257-3920.
Yep. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second. Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second. Now let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? This me?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports.
We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go start watching.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say. 857-210-501. 3 8s.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes to satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
We are back. We are back in the fun half of the program, and we are joined by our friends Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton. What's up, guys?
Friends, I'm, so glad to hear that. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Did you not feel the same way?
Oh, no, I just thought we were, like work colleagues. I didn't want to presume.
Well, I think we can now be friends.
Thank you.
Okay.
How are you two doing, friends?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Glad to know that we're all friends. That's the main takeaway, I guess, right now, right?
I think it's a good thing. It's a real big step for us.
Yeah, in a world full of antagonism amongst the left, I think that, the three of us, five of us, if you include Matt and Bradley being friends, is a
They're not my friends.
positive step forward. Oh, okay. Well, there has to be some delineation. Otherwise, everyone can't be your friend. But they're my friends. So I'm going to be a big tent friend kind of guy, and you can be more
I'm
selective.
just joking. Cool. All right, well, what's happening over on Doomed and Scam Economy and the discourse, guys?
Sure. So on Doom this past Tuesday, it was a Matt Binder solo episode. I basically walked everyone through a recent piece of reporting from me about how trolls basically fabricated fake screenshots to try to tie the Buffalo and Uvalde shootings together and spread more nefarious conspiracy theories, somehow more nefarious than what actually happened, where dozens of people in each, all together were killed. But yeah, so I went through that on Doomed, which you could check out at youtube.com/MattBinder and doomedcast.com for the podcast version. And then tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time on Scam Economy, I talked to Leo Schwartz. He's a journalist with Rest of World. And he had he had a few great pieces we talked about. But the overarching theme of the episode is basically trying to understand exactly how bad the recent crypto crash, where Terra and Luna failed, taking the crypto market down with it, how badly it affected just everyday normal people, especially outside the U.S. in countries like Argentina and Iran and Nigeria, where unfortunately very vulnerable people put their money in this stable coin. Simply not even as like a long-term investment. We're not talking tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking like $1,000 just to like save their money from the inflation in their country based on their own country's currency. And they've now lost everything. So very interesting episode. Be sure to check it out live tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, youtube.com/MattBinder. And the podcast version of the show will be up at scameconomy.com and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Amazing. All right, what's happening over on the discourse, Brandon?
Well, my co-hosts have mercifully agreed to come off of strike and meet with me this weekend to discuss many topics. So lucky for our fans, there'll be a new episode out by Monday, or, heads will roll. Not mine, but someone's. Not my co-host either, but someone.
Gotcha. All right, well.
That's the kind of accountability I can promise.
You rule with an iron fist, it seems like.
You know what they say, iron fist, warm heart.
Everyone says that, you're right.
Known phrase.
Speaking of crypto, let's just get right into this. Binder, I'll see crypto clips throughout the week and things like that, and I'll just save them specifically for you. So I hope that warms your heart a little bit before we get enraged by this clip.
I'm always on your when you see one of the worst, most disgusting things and predatory things imaginable. The first thing that comes to your mind is me, so I'll take it.
Exactly.
Matt, gotta save this for Matt. I did want to say though, no, Luna crashed twice because after Luna crashed, they made a new Luna on a second.
Yeah, they brought Luna 2.0 out. Yeah, and then seriously, that's what it's called. And they thought, hey, let's give some free Luna 2 to all the people who held Terra and Luna as like a, try to recoup your investment type thing. Like, we're sorry for what happened.
It's like the free bet that you get on like DraftKings Sportsbook when they want you to keep spending more money so that you won't leave the platform.
So if you lost all this money and then they give you free money, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to immediately cash out so you could try to recoup at least some of your investment, right? So that's what happened. And Luna 2 immediately fell something like 90% or something like that.
Oh my God, I love that.
I'm not convinced that anybody has ever actually successfully cashed out of the crypto ecosystem. Not anybody as in like any individual, but like that there is a significant number of people who have been able to get money out of this ecosystem, and it's not just like trapped in various like in various like books of random coins. Like, do we know anyone who's ever like just got it, like actually just like gotten the money out there? Like, they had Bitcoin, in recent days, not the first Bitcoin millionaire, but like recently, anyone who's like had a significant amount of Bitcoin and like gotten it like in cash.
Oh, there was a recent story back when the Russia invasion of Ukraine started, where some like broker with a private Russian client, their client wanted to cash out. I don't remember the exact amount, so I don't want to put a number on it, but it was like a lot of money in Bitcoin or another crypto. I think it was Bitcoin though, and they wanted to cash out. And when they went to go cash out, they had to like privately contact the company, and they were basically laughed at. Like, you can't withdraw this much money. We can't give you this much. Like,
you're here forever.
We don't have the liquidity to give you that much. Yes.
All right. Well, with that said, let's turn to this clip here. So, what better time to start hawking crypto if you're a United States senator when it's in the midst of free fall and people are slowly beginning to believe and understand that this is maybe the largest pyramid scam in the history of the world in terms of dollar figures? What better time for bipartisanship, lovely bipartisanship? Here is Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis and Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who represents our state here of New York. I mean, this is just because she's close with Wall Street people and they're hawking crypto to her and she's doing their bidding. But like, they go here on CNBC to talk about crypto and whether or not people should be using it in their retirement funds. Bad idea, but this is what they're paid to do, apparently.
Hey, Senators, two questions for you. One is, and I'm sure you saw this a little over a month ago, Fidelity, the largest 401k manager in the country, announced that they were going to offer Bitcoin to users or to consumers. Companies have to choose to allow their employees to put Bitcoin in their 401ks. The Labor Department came out and said this is a terrible idea. What do you think?
I think the Labor Department's wrong. I think it's a wonderful idea. It should be part of a diversified asset allocation, and it should be on the end of the spectrum of a store of value. Obviously, if you have a fully diversified asset allocation, you have some assets that you want to produce income in the short run. You also want some assets that are just a store of value. And I think that's where Bitcoin really shines.
Can we, yeah.
I think people
shines.
I think people should know this. It's unclear how much she holds right now, but Senator Cynthia Lummis has a little bit of a conflict of interest here. She is a holder of Bitcoin and a significant amount too. She holds between $100,000 and $350,000 in Bitcoin. And this is from an article from the fairly, I don't want to say pro, but they cover crypto quite well, in positive light, CoinDesk. And on top of that, she made this purchase in August when Bitcoin was worth between 50,000 and whatever the max it went up to. I think it was like 69,000.
Yeah, she wanted to store some value. How did that work out, Binder?
Right. So she's at a loss right now. But, if you're a true believer and a holder, like it seems like she is, and you want to, make your money back and you're still holding, what better way than to, just convince bunch of retirees and various other people who don't know anything about how this works to just, invest in Bitcoin so that
the value will go up for her.
Exactly.
I would not be. Do we know if Gillibrand has Bitcoin holdings? Binder, can you look that up?
I'm going to look that up right now. I know about Cynthia Lummis because she has long been a pro crypto advocate.
Yeah,
in the
she
Senate.
had the laser eyes profile. pic,
Yes.
but this is literally just like if people owned Herbalife stock and they're like, Herbalife is a great thing to invest in.
Right.
I mean, maybe even maybe
Just
might even be worth it.
objectively.
Probably even worse than Herbalife because there's probably some protections. I'm not an investor, but
Yeah.
crypto's all bullshit.
All right, let's keep going.
I think it's some of the hardest money that's ever been created in the world. And for that reason, it belongs as a slice of a diversified asset allocation for retirement funds.
Senator Gillibrand, you agree, disagree?
Go on, Kristen.
No, I agree. And that's why this piece of legislation is so important and why it's so timely. Once you create basic infrastructure around these types of digital assets, where there are disclosure requirements, where they have a regulator, where there's full transparency, that is going to create the safety and soundness in the market that will give other people comfort.
It's a bullshit market. Sorry, I'm pausing it again, but this is what infuriates me about the crypto commercial starring like Steph Curry and Shaq, where it's like you can learn how to. You don't need to know shit, but you can still learn how to trade crypto safely. And that message that there is a way to trade this safely, as if like it's like saying we'll make sure you get your snake oil.
Yeah.
like we'll make sure that like when you buy the
Expedited
snake oil,
free shipping for
that
the snake oil
gets to you.
Yes.
Like, and it's glossed over the fact that actually the snake oil is not going to cure anything that you need cured, and it might even set you back.
It's particularly insidious because we have a massive issue in this country with retirement funds. Basically, the pension funds are being gutted. We don't have the security for our retirees anymore. And you see, as Binder, we've talked about, you've pointed this out, forums of Bitcoin investors saying, I didn't have a 401k as a young person. I've lost all of my retirement savings. And now it's really, I mean, everyone who watches CNBC is 65 or older, let's be real. And so these two are going on there to basically say, this is how you could diversify your portfolio with this asset. Crypto is in the tank right now. And it's just really to drive up the price for existing holders like Loomis.
And also
anyone
Oh, sorry.
anyone who
Go ahead.
anyone who purchased Bitcoin in the past year, when the big influx of new crypto users came in from like mainstream media and like the normies, every single one of them who purchased Bitcoin, if they wanted to sell right now, they would sell at a loss.
They're all underwater.
Yeah, they're underwater. Every single one of this. The only people right now who can say they made money from Bitcoin, obviously, if they didn't sell and they were hodlers like they're encouraged to do, because again, number only goes up. Keep hodling as all the big players are selling off because that's when there's liquidity there and the number is high. All those people are losers right now, and unless you got in early, you're at a loss right now.
I obviously attribute less agency or kind of responsibility to the athletes in those commercials than the senators, but it kind of feels like the same message, which is just like the people watching these ads, the people watching these spots, they're marks.
Yeah,
like they're literally marks for this industry.
Yeah, whether it's the athletes or whether it's these politicians, they are literally juiced by funds to try to find more marks, and that's why it's really despicable. And Kirsten Gillibrand, I don't know who Loomis is. She's a freak, probably. Gillibrand,
she's like a Republican. She's a Republican from I think like Wyoming or something.
Right,
yeah,
right,
from Wyoming. Yeah.
But this is really despicable what Gillibrand participating in this, and I hope I tweet at her honestly. Like she should get a lot of heat for this bullshit.
Well,
I want Brander to jump. Brander.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you're all right. And it's crypto is clearly in a debt spiral, and they're just rummaging for new ways to bring in more liquidity for the big whales who are currently in there and who have no way to get out right now, much less the amount of money. And I'm sure people will talk about like the small crypto holder, but there's definitely not enough money for them to sell out at this point now, and much less if they decide to hold on for the long term. But to speak to the safety thing, they're currently co-sponsoring a bill now that is, like they would say is intended to make crypto less safe, but they have chosen to not have cryptocurrencies and I guess NFTs defined securities in their new bill, but to define them as a much more vague, much more wishy-washy sort of commodities that they won't be under incredibly strict regulation like other types of stocks and bonds via the SEC. Drop my camera again. Oh no, but that because they'd be under a different sort of they'd be under a different trade commission, the CFTC.
Yes,
yeah,
the
Brandon's
Commodity
here, but
Futures
his,
Trading
his
Commission.
camera.
Yeah.
Let's listen to the rest of this Gillibrand clip while he fixes his camera.
Full transparency. That is going to create the safety and soundness in the market that will give other people comfort that this is a market that is here to stay. It's one that is properly regulated and one that has oversight and accountability. And that's what this legislation is going to do. So while many people are uncomfortable with where these digital assets are being used or offered today, once a regulatory framework's put around it, there will be more comfort there.
It's not where they're being offered from.
No, it is the fundamental nature of crypto. There's no regulation that's gonna. I mean, this is just like it's a complete false security that she's providing there. No, there's no way to regulate this in the way that, like, in a bipartisan way at the very least, that's going to provide the security that she says, specifically for retirees. It's quite despicable.
Right. The reason they want it classified, and when I mean all the major crypto exchanges, they want it classified as a commodities because the CFTC is much weaker than the SEC. And you know what? They're sort of, I don't know if this is the right word, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but they're sort of, I don't know, they themselves are greatly influenced by these crypto advocates as well, it seems. This is the same commission that the chief of the commission tweeted out a photo of her hanging out with the that guy who founded FTX, one of the major crypto exchanges. He's the one who went on Bloomberg and accidentally said how this is all just a big Ponzi scheme and tried to, like, sort of reverse when he realized what he was saying.
Yeah. Anyway, just gross. Gross. I hope Gillibrand's proud that she's in opposition to the Biden administration on this.
Yeah,
frankly.
horrible.
I mean, this is when she'll go reach across the aisle.
I think that in the pursuit of fairness, we shouldn't only spread FUD, and we should offer some sort of like alternative. Maybe retirees should get a portion of their Social Security in cryptocurrency.
Oh.
But you can pick the coin, and instead of like Medicare and Medicaid, you can get like NFTs. You can get like I don't know, like they can put your healthcare on the blockchain.
Oh, there's actually sadly cities who are looking into doing that. Yeah.
Oh.
Actually,
Yeah,
literally
soft,
putting your
like,
healthcare records on the blockchain.
Not regulated, it needs to be banned.
People, yeah, exactly. Not regulated. This stuff needs to absolutely be banned. I mean, there's a professor, Prof. Hillary Allen on Twitter, says a good thread. I'll just read a little bit. Today, Loomis and Gillibrand launched their bipartisan crypto bill. It's bipartisan in the sense that senators, we should all know this about this word bipartisan, but it's bipartisan in the sense that senators are from different parties are giving the crypto industry pretty much what it wants, but it doesn't honor the regulatory goals that Dems typically prioritize. I mean, Gillibrand is bought. Like, that's what I would suggest is explains her doing this, and it's like I said before, it's despicable.
It should not shock you, given like her relationship with and Schumer, by the way, Wall Street donors, just based on being in New York fundamentally. Go on, Brandon.
And I just wanted to say before we shift the topics, but more than just bringing in exit liquidity for the big whales and the various venture capital funds who want to get out or get into crypto, this is also setting the ground for like those people to be bailed out once the market eventually collapses. Like once like all the stable coins collapse, like Terra, once all of the NFT markets and OpenSeas collapse, the people who are going to be left holding the bag are going to be like the small-ish investors, and you'll see all of the usual characters going hand in hand to like the government for like a bailout, because like a portion of their portfolios, not their workers' pensions portfolios, but their personal portfolios were in crypto more than they should have been, and so like they're going to need a refund from the government, because we've seen this with crypto all the time. It's all deregulation and decentralization until someone steals, and then like the people who have the most power are able to seek recompense through the government, and the people without any are unable to.
And it's ridiculous. I'm sorry to keep going on this, but it's ridiculous that we just have a news organization that goes up to someone like Cynthia Loomis, who's clearly invested in this thing, and asks them what they think about it. Like, I mean, maybe one of the better concepts to come out of the Enlightenment was disinterestedness, which is to say that like you're not allowed to speak on something if it directly benefits you. And so, and that's why like crypto people, it's like, I'm yet to hear from a crypto case from somebody who isn't holding, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's all just motivated. Even if you literally believe all of the stuff that you're going to tell me about the technological promise, it's bullshit that you've sold yourself because you are invested in it. You cannot be objective about it.
They're trying to outpace the bad news too. I want to say they're trying to outpace the bad news of like crypto collapsing, and every news story you hear out of the crypto industry is like hack $100 million stolen, no way to recover it. Hack, 18 apes stolen in Discord hack. And so, this is like mainstream news stories are still trying to pump up crypto before like all of that wave of bad news gets like, fully dispersed into the populace's idea. And that's all crypto is to even your everyday average people.
Right. And for Loomis, it's not even so much like they ask for her opinion on it without asking her bringing up her conflict of interests. She's literally writing laws, or I should say in this case, taking laws that were written from her by the industry itself and trying to pass them.
Yeah.
So that's even worse. But then also on that, there's this petition that's been going around signed by some really well-known and big computer scientists and computer developers, all speaking out against this whole industry, and they're working on getting it signed by even more people in the field. Because frankly, again, like the point you made, like even people who look at it from the technological standpoint, at the financial standpoint, those who are not also invested, those who are just looking at it from the technological standpoint, seem to all be against it as well. Like there is nothing there, even from the people who are just looking at it from like tech aspect.
Matt, I think there's something up with your mic a little bit. It's clipping.
All right, let me see what I can do.
Yeah, I'm gonna read some IMs and then we'll get to another clip. Nick from Philadelphia, forever waiting for that Philly show announcement. Met Emma and Matt at the Philly TMBS show a few years ago. Looking forward to getting pictures with you guys where I don't look like a Wookiee and a troll doll had a baby that took too much acid. All right, Nick, be kind to yourself.
I don't remember meeting that person.
Yeah, rest in power, Michael. Left is Morbin time. Wait, what was that from? Morbin time? That was on Twitter the other day. It's the Morbius memes.
Morbius, yeah. Oh my God, that movie is terrible.
You saw it?
I tried to. I tried to sit through it, but it's really boring.
Yeah, I heard awful things.
Jared Leto's just not a compelling actor. There's nothing that Jared Leto.
He's also apparently a terrible person, and I don't know why he hasn't been canceled yet. He's a terrible actor, and I will stand on this hill that his portrayal that he won the Oscar for in Dallas Buyers Club should have gone to not him, maybe a queer actor, trans actor, whatever, because it was really up its own ass and terrible.
I think was also like the cusp of it being like probably not cool to do that. Like
and he's been accused of like really weird sexual misconduct, and I don't know why he keeps getting roles. So I hate Jared Leto, actually. In a way that maybe is not healthy. Half glass full. I can't watch that little girl's testimony without thinking of my own kids. My daughter expressed fear of going to school because it might blow up. It's so disgusting that gun nuts don't have empathy or any sense to realize that their demand for instant gun gratification doesn't outweigh the trauma that is inflicted by our lax gun laws.
And like our whole generation basically is familiar with this same thing. Like I remember Columbine. I remember looking at the door to the school thinking like, okay, if someone comes in, I'm going to try to run out the window or something like that. I remember all the conversations in youth group where it was the takeaway from Columbine was not that we should do gun control, but that if a school shooter comes and puts a gun to your head, don't deny God before he kills you. Like we have a really traumatized country because of this, because we allow guns to whoever wants to go purchase one. Like it's I was gonna say like it's a soda pop, but I mean Bloomberg's getting in the way of those. So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's part of the fantasy for a lot of those people. Like you have guns to protect yourself or to feel powerful in a society that's full of dangerous people with guns. It's not so much a self-fulfilling like cycle, but it's like there is clearly a connection that these people who stockpile guns for the act of like self-defense take some kind of gratification, maybe not in the direct acts of violence that use guns, but the idea of living in a society that requires these kinds of weapons.
Shane from Canada. So the Ontario election was a disaster. We had the lowest turnout in the province's history, and for Binder specifically on the federal level, to federal conservatives have apparently grown their membership to 600,000, making it the largest party in the country. 300,000 of those have been brought in by far-right bullshitter crypto bro Pierre Poilievre, or Poil, who was likely to be the next conservative leader and prime minister. Wow. Chris Burdick, Emma, I think we might have all misjudged that one caller. Maybe he was complimenting you on your keen observational skills and calling you in the studi pie. All right. Okay, great. Glass Seagull, getting pretty disillusioned with Democrats breaking their promises. First Build Back Better, and now this guy's not following through on killing Brett Kavanaugh. Joking. All right, dude. Joking.
But to bring it up though and be serious though, like you see all these conservatives yelling and screaming about how something needs to be done about this. It's like, are you kidding me? After you guys just went on a whole escapade these past 2 weeks about how criminals will break laws anyway, so why pass any? Give me a break.
Yeah, we didn't do anything after 9/11. Just cut your house down to one door and you're fine.
Also, Kavanaugh was never in any danger. The guy showed up without his whatever he was supposedly brought with him from California, went down to wherever, like blocks and blocks away, and phoned the police and said, I'm having suicidal thoughts and thinking terrible things.
Yeah.
And they picked him up right there. They had to then go search his car, I guess it was, to find all the stuff. Kavanaugh was never in any danger at any point.
JP from Denver. Hi, Emma. I was pretty disappointed in the recent Broncos ownership announcement. Walmart money will have near monopoly on Denver sports. I know. What's your take? And can we do anything to push back against sports oligarchs? Also, go Avs. Go Avs if the Rangers lose this series. I hope they win. But not if the Rangers don't lose. Win. Yeah, that is disappointing, and it's so ridiculous. Like when the guy that bought the Broncos is the son of the Walmart heir, and he's one of like the 20 richest people in the world. And it's just like such an indictment that this son, who didn't even, I mean, like, not that I even believe in the merits of building something like a exploitative capitalist conglomerate like Walmart is, but he's just like inherited it. And we just don't tax that enough. That should be so heavily taxed. And yes, I've made this point before. I think that billionaires owning sports teams is an unsustainable system, and they should be part of city and state partly city and state owned. And also, you know, you can have like a system like they have with the Packers where it's basically owned collectively.
Yeah, I think the other issue too is there's no one there for this is happening a lot in baseball, but it might happen elsewhere too. Is that, I mean, it's happening with the Knicks, but there's no incentive for these teams to be good.
Well, what? Because the Knicks are like the most profitable basketball team in the entire NBA, and yet they're terrible.
That to me is the biggest issue with that type of ownership. Is it's happening a lot in the MLB where, you know, teams like the Reds and the Pirates are making money no matter what because of the TV deals and the rights that they have. So, and the revenue sharing agreements there. So their teams can suck. They don't care about the product they're putting out because the money will roll in no matter what.
This is a good opportunity to go to that clip of Jack Del Rio. So, Jack Del Rio, former head coach of the then Oakland Raiders, but now Washington Commanders defensive coordinator, has been like ultra MAGA for quite a while, publicly so. He made this statement yesterday that he had to walk back because the Washington Commanders play in Virginia. And the people were like, oh, well, you want a new stadium? You can't speak this way about January 6th. And he like apologized, but it's just so hollow. Here he is, and here are his comments about January 6th being, quote, just a dust up.
You want to talk about it? I'd talk about it with anybody. Yeah, no problem. At any time. But they're not. I'm just expressing myself. And I think we all as Americans have the right to express ourselves, especially if you're being respectful. I'm being respectful. I just asked a simple question. Really, let's get right down to it. What did I ask? A simple question. Why are we not looking into those things? If we're going to talk about it, why are we not looking into those things? Because it's kind of hard for me to say I can
property
realistically look at it, I see the images on TV. People's livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses are being burned down. No problem. And then we have a dust up at the Capitol. Well, there's nothing burned down. And we're not going to talk about, we're going to make that a major deal. I just think it's kind of two standards. And if we apply the same standard and we're going to be reasonable with each other, let's have a discussion. That's all it was. Let's have a discussion. We're Americans. Let's talk it through. I'm for us, you know, having a great opportunity to have a fulfilled life. Like I said, every which way I can. When I'm here, it's about love and respect.
So so he had to apologize for that. Unsurprisingly, he was also against players protesting during the national anthem. I know that might come as a shock for people. But why? Well, one, it's not shocking to me that Jack Del Rio is employed by the Washington Commanders, formerly the Washington Racial Slurs, owned by Dan Snyder, Trump backer, notoriously one of the worst owners in professional sports in terms of both the outcomes of the team since he took over and also the workplace that he has presided over, which has come under fire and is currently under congressional investigation for mass sexual misconduct in a cover-up. So that's his defensive coordinator, which shouldn't shock you. But there's a lot more guys like this in the NFL than I think people want to actually grapple with. Or me, it makes me
standard
uncomfortable.
Conservative.
Standard conservative. And players need more rights, particularly in the NFL, and they don't have the same, every contract in the NBA is fully guaranteed. People don't realize when they see flowery numbers for contracts in the NFL, a lot of it's not guaranteed for injury. Other things, say you test positive for marijuana, you could get cut instantly. It's precarious because this is a culture within the NFL that needs to get weeded out. There are these white coaches who, and it's way worse in college football because they don't pay their players. They just treat them like, servants essentially. They are old, conservative, I'll go farther where they sometimes, or maybe I shouldn't say that. They want to boss around black players and they enjoy doing it. And Jack Del Rio is that kind of guy.
I was gonna say, it's just interesting. You can tell by the way he characterized I would assume he was referring to like the various BLM protests that sprung up in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the multiple other killings that occurred over the past, by the police of unarmed black people over the past 2 years. But you can tell by the way he described it that he was probably like aggrieved by the fact that more people weren't like having their heads cracked open by the police during those protests. Like he seems that like that seems to be his primary grievance with it, that he feels like the people at the Capitol were treated harsher than the people in the streets for BLM protests, even despite the fact that that time was characterized by video after video from around like all of America of cops like beating protesters, pushing down old people, gassing moms and nuns while they formed like an anti-violence line. All of that stuff you presume that he saw, but he thinks it wasn't harsh enough. A few people caught some indictments for storming the Capitol, in which are like, the cops who they love, one of the cop who they proclaimed to love police got killed, and he feels like there should be no criminal or like legal or even social repercussions for that. And I think that really does speak to the underlying mentality that people are afraid to like point out about, a lot of people's relationship with the police in this country, that it's for other people. It's for brown people. It's for people who are protesting against like the police state. It's for, poor people like Occupy Wall Street to be cracked down. And any amount of policing is too much for me to be subject to. And, that's what a lot of the January 6th grievance is actually. Like any amount of policing I'm subject to is government overreach because the police don't exist for this region. And sometimes I think, people are way too generous with treating that kind of viewpoint from Republicans as though it's, a sign that they kind of get it about police brutality. But, it's just like bigotry. Yeah. Like thinking that you deserve special rights, especially from the state because of some inherent quality is like, it's bigotry. And that's what it needs to be called out as, especially in situations where they're trying to appeal to some like greater need for like civil rights or, police treatment of civilians. That's not what they're actually calling for.
Maybe he should stick to sports. I don't know.
this revision we're seeing about what happened the summer after George Floyd was killed is like the main gospel of right wingers right now. That the cops did not put them down. It was all just looting and property damage to beat the band, and the cops were just not doing anything. And we all know that wasn't true. We all know that the cops were instigating that stuff to beat the band, lying about it. And also, just to back up a little bit, January 6th was a violent protest to overturn a democratic election. George Floyd protests were protests against police killing. And those are different things. So if you want to really talk about it, Jack Del Rio, if you want to just engage in free speech, the one that you want to be treated easier is the one that they're trying to overturn a democratic election. And like, I don't know how many fucking football plays you got to learn, but if you actually think that election was stolen, you're a big time idiot, and that's a liability for your team, and I think you should be fired.
And I really feel for particularly black players in those rooms, and like, just giving you, there are many more Jack Del Rios on coaching staffs, particularly in the NFL.
And they should be hunted.
They should be rooted out.
Rooted out of the league, exactly.
If you're going to be, that's a league that's 70% black, there's no place for that kind of perspective there, frankly. But because teams are owned by capitalists, and because Dan Snyder is very ideologically aligned with that guy, Del Rio, I doubt that Del Rio will get fired based on the fact it might be with a different owner, but not with that owner.
And if he gets fired, he will be hired somewhere else.
100%.
And I'm just saying, like, I don't have, like, the problem for me, like the whole cancel culture and people getting fired. That's a problem to me for like normal workers.
Yeah.
At high level positions like this, that does not apply to me. I am not about elite people.
He makes millions.
Yeah, I'm not about protecting elite people from accountability and criticism in the name of not being woke.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think that that's just at some point the whole cancel thing is people like railing against changing norms. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of those people are perfectly fine with, people losing their job for a lot less than like everyone not liking you, like, a rich person complaining about your service or some, shit like that. And so the idea that we should just all be subject, like, rather that the Constitution serves to protect people's rights to just be like an asshole at their job or like in public and have no one be like, hey, can you just like leave, is, it just shows where their minds are at. Like they're just like a very anti-social, I'd say like anti-fun group. Like the idea that their idea of having a good time is coming to a party and being the asshole, and like everyone else being forced to just like deal with them and not just like ask them to leave.
Exactly. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator, respectfully, Jack Del Rio sounds like a massive piss baby. The last time of the day says Emma, or last IM, of the day. Emma, I think it's unfair to say college athletes, football and basketball don't get paid. It's not unfair. There is a huge booster cachet of money going towards these players. Only the stars. It's generally ignored by the media and the NCAA because NIL at least allows players to market themselves. It's still a massively exploitative endeavor for the majority of college athletes. My friend, I know you're coming from a good place. NIL applies to star players. There are, especially coming in to different schools. Name and likeness laws are for if you're a 5-star recruit and you're coming out of some high school and you're going to UCLA or you're going to Alabama. Yes, you might get a deal, and it's going to favor these colleges that are in bigger markets, like in LA. That's why California was at the forefront of this, because they're going to be able to attract better athletes there.
Also, it's really recent.
This has been happening for a year. It is not a substitute for paying players. It is not a substitute for paying players for their labor. If you want it, the star players can still get endorsement deals. I think that's right. Great. You're the quarterback of USC. I'm sure you're going to get more endorsement deals than the third string running back at Arkansas. But doesn't mean that there should not be base pay that is proportional to the billions and billions in revenue that goes just to the school and just to the coaches. Not a substitute.
Did I ever suggest that boosters paying players under the table counts as pay?
Yeah.
Like that's paternalism.
Yes.
So I mean, yeah, you have to depend on a donor. I mean,
And you have to depend on the school being like having a robust booster where it's just like a big fat cat at Texas A&M wants to feel like a he's a big shot standing on the sideline in A&M gear. Ridiculous.
This is I hate to say it, but this is pedantry. Like you've let pedantry drive you into. The point is they should be legally compensated for the amount of revenue that those are taken. They shouldn't have to have some fucking rich booster pull a wad of 20s out of their pocket when they go to get lunch sometime. Like that's not the same thing.
Calling from a 780 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 780.
Oh, this is me. Can you hear me?
You. Yes. Who's this?
This is Devin from Alberta. So a couple weeks ago, someone called in to Sam and was talking about how they wanted to appropriate language from the right wing because it was pissing them off. And you guys kind of have a lot of callers like that, or they just have some sort of, I don't know, anxiety around what the right wing is doing, especially people that align with the far right. We can't appropriate language. We can't do anything like that. We use language, excuse me, a lot differently than they do. We typically use language like gender affirming to justify our beliefs, to place them into something real, usually studied by academia. The right wing, they only use language like that to trigger people, specifically people like us. So it's just not a strategy that we can do. If people are feeling anxious and you want to like piss off the right, I guess, or like win the culture war, because really that's what this is, just appropriate their culture. Meaning, Michael used to talk about this a lot. He used to mention how Jordan Peterson and like all these guys, they shouldn't be able to own self-betterment. So the right shouldn't be able to own anything, whether it's self-improvement, sports, that's a big one, hunting, like any type of hobby, cultural pastime, just be in those spaces. If you're a lefty, just be there, be yourself, be open, and that will trigger them a lot more than like us saying, make America great, but like from a left-wing context. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, that was so well said. I mean, and that's part of why I'm trying to make a point to talk a bit more about some of these sports topics, because I don't have an expertise in hunting or in self-improvement / wellness, right? That's my little niche. But the for others, I mean, and I also think Binder's doing it with crypto. So couldn't agree with you more. Excellent point, and I really appreciate the call.
No worries. Thanks.
Speaking of crypto, this just came across my screen here. I can't believe what I'm reading here. Jay-Z and Jack Dorsey of Twitter fame are teaming up to launch a new financial literacy program called the Bitcoin Academy for residents of the Marcy Houses project in Brooklyn, where the rapper grew up. I mean,
I think that speaks for itself.
We have
Jesus
to.
Christ.
I make this point all the time with my friends, but I want to make it very clear too. Like I love Jay-Z as a musician. Jay-Z, he's not only in his persona but in his life is a consummate. He is essentially a robber baron capitalist.
He's a businessman.
Like he's essentially like John Rockefeller. I mean, obviously Rockefeller. I mean, like actually, like he's emulating like literal industrialists and how he like see like his entire. He is a fantastic, talented artist who is chiefly concerned with making money.
I'm like I don't even think Jay-Z's that good. That's like my
I was gonna say I think he's an average artist and he's been a bad one for the past like 20 years.
Oh no, I agree. I would agree with you on that.
I think that like Kanye West. I think like Kanye West. No, definitely. I like his first few albums. Like they're classic.
Yeah, like 90s, early 2000s.
Are they the best of the era? Not really, but Jay-Z's best quality has always been Jay-Z's ability to market Jay-Z. So,
Well, Jay-Z was, I think Jay-Z really suffered. Like, the songs I like of Jay-Z's are when Kanye's making the beats. That's really the only thing.
Well, Kanye's a good person to bring up too, because Jay-Z's prime appeal are for people who like kind of got into rap around like the Blueprint 3. And so like a lot of these things that Jay-Z and Kanye do like are supposed to be shout outs to Black culture, but are really being consumed by like white people, and like usually like white finance bros like in Boston. No shade to the city, but so this sort of putting money into crypto, it's like when any other crypto company decides they want to buy wind farms in Ghana, like the philanthropy aspect of it is just to funnel more people outside of who you're specifically helping into the crypto marketplace by proving it has like some utility outside of, I don't know, burning down rainforest. So like, I mean, I think Jay-Z's prime audience for this stuff is like the upper middle class white people who work at financial institutions who are going to have the ability to invest more in Jay-Z's, like whatever Jay-Z's crypto stuff is.
Let's turn to a different clip. I want to talk about this Kyle Rittenhouse thing, if we have the opportunity. Kyle Rittenhouse has been on a media tour complaining about, he was on Tucker Carlson the other night, complaining about the fact that he is being discriminated against. And he will say something very similar here in this clip. But what has this country come to when they don't face the consequences for being a murderer in terms of the legal system, but there's still social consequences for being a murderer. I mean, this is basically cancel culture. I
thought it was called Zimmermaning.
Or OJing, honestly. A tale as old as time. Here he is saying that he's facing consequences for killing somebody. Get your tissues ready.
Kyle, do you feel discriminated against when it comes to you trying to get into a school or going anywhere or just living a normal life? I mean, obviously, the conservative right, or maybe even libertarians or centrists that are just patriot, pro-American, loving individuals, they love you, right? But do you feel discriminated against like these far left, these left-leaning anything, anywhere you go? Are you feeling that in your life right now as you get older?
Well, yeah, I do feel a little discriminated against. I feel I will never have a normal life, and I've accepted that, but I'm going to make the best out of my life. And I feel like everything I do is judged and scrutinized by these politicians, these left-leaning organizations, and it honestly needs to stop because it happens with so many Americans every single day.
So many other murderers.
Yeah, so many other killers.
You know what he's doing there, though? Because this is particularly about his college application, it's all they're going to use this to extrapolate larger to white people being discriminated against and going into colleges. Because But
like, good luck. Like,
yeah.
He fucking killed people. I don't know what we're talking about. Like,
but like, let's even. No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just don't. I'm surprised. Like, I don't know what his fucking grades are, but like, you're a famous killer, dude. Like.
But let's even put that point of his aside though, like that, he gets, but like, he's not really being covered anymore for what he did. Like, the trial happened, the jury came back with their verdict. And he is one of the luckiest motherfuckers on the planet, and is a free man after killing 2 people and injuring a third. With that being said, though, if he just like went ahead and lived a private life like he claims he wants to, I guarantee most people would not pay attention to Kyle Rittenhouse anymore. The fact of the matter is, the dude is being judged by him going out and trying to monetize what he did, what he was on trial for. Like, he's not being.
But he has no choice, Binder. He has no choice but to seek this method of employment of getting likely paid to go on television programs and internet shows to talk about woe is me. I mean, he couldn't get another job if he tried because of the really just repressive consequences socially of being a killer.
Right.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, that's like a classic argument tactic for people who find themselves in line with the far right, that like social norms and individual morality you should be forced to make that one-to-one with the way a law is used in this country. And so like if he has been acquitted of the crime, you as an individual person must sort of realign your morality, go like, well, I guess he doesn't suck then. I guess I should be okay with being in a class with him because the law as it is used in a country who, most people will admit we know the law is not just in this country, but even those people who would admit this still feel sometimes that you should be kind of shackled to it in some way because it is in fact the law. That we should be as a society shackled to whatever our racist legal system produces, and we should just pretend like it's how we also feel. And that's just not reasonable, especially when Matt says that he's just going to CPAC every year. He's going to Crypto Miami to promote whatever shitcoin that the CPAC adjacent
he's going on tours with
does.
Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA.
Exactly. There's always going to be a social cost for doing things that people do not like. But for this is a new burgeoning industry for a lot of people that they're trying to make their mark on, which is being like a professional internet shitbag. And they don't want that to be something they're judged for when they log off. But that's not really reasonable, especially since you've only really been allowed to be a professional internet shitbag for the past 5 years. So we don't know what the real longevity of that job is in terms of late career aspirations.
Someone wrote in Sam's secret cider parties. Rittenhouse should consider attending the University of Austin. I'm sure he would be welcome with open arms.
He should dye his hair. He should dye his hair, get a face tattoo to distract from his face has been plastered all over stuff.
Pull a pony boy.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know what that means. I just immediately thought Mr. Hands, and I was like, I don't think we can advocate that. But
it's an old reference to The Outsiders.
It is a very funny reference to make for somebody that's not
Well, Pony Boy was on the run. He bleached his hair. I mean,
do not Google Mr. Hands, audience.
Do not.
Yeah, don't do that.
Emma's wrong. Wrote in, it's crazy how wrong Emma is about college sports. I think I'm actually never been more right in my entire life that college athletes should get paid.
Just a note for folks who send in messages like that. Just saying you're wrong. You need to have details.
Yeah, let me know.
Literally, even if we wanted to get upset and hurt our feelings hurt by it, there's not enough to go on.
Debate me, bro. Debate me, bro.
I do think some of this is something that happens a lot where it's people just conceptualize being a professional athlete as either their or too many people's dream job for it not to just be a just net positive for everyone who's doing it. But I've known professional athletes third string players for the Tennessee Titans who are who just leave playing because they never see any play time. No one ever talks about them, but they still have the capacity to get injured. And so it's definitely a better job on paper than most people probably feel like they have, but that doesn't make it, outside of the realm of sucking.
Well, there's
wage labor, and it's dangerous.
Those players, there's no upward mobility. Their contracts are, as I mentioned, not guaranteed and fairly low for that kind of player, and they'll likely only play 2 to 3 years, and then they are not left with anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just give me a break with this.
Except the potential, they're not left with anything except the capacity for a traumatic brain injury when it comes to being in the NHL and NFL.
Right. Let's take another call. Calling from a 706 area code. Who's this radio calling from?
Hey, this is Justin from Augusta, Georgia.
Justin, what's on your mind?
If I could just briefly, I want to speak to something I've seen come up in the gun debate. And it's kind of a small argument, but one that I think is important to have some historical context for, and that's the argument that people on the left proposing gun legislation now or amendments now is reactionary.
Can you rephrase that? I'm sorry.
Or just elaborate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a PhD student, and my area of research is early American history. So I am familiar with the context that went into the drafting of the Constitution and the amendments, the Bill of Rights, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you see conservatives refer back to quite often is the notion that these things are fundamental and unquestionable things that just kind of arose out of their time. not that they were responding to a historical context. That's why you'll see a lot of conservatives use the line that, things like the well-regulated militia, part of the Second Amendment can be broken down semantically and not in a historical context. But I think it's important to note that the amendments themselves were reactionary. The founders preempted the War of 1812, and they knew that something like that was going to happen, which is why they drafted the Second Amendment, because they didn't collect taxes to have a military. There are historical explanations for why these amendments happened that show that they were fundamentally reactive, not proactive to preempt an assault rifle 200 years later.
Right.
Which is just to say that the idea that we're being reactionary, if anything, that works in our favor, because that's what had been, the history of making amendments and laws in this country for 200 plus years.
So you're being an originalist because you have the concept. I mean, I'm being tongue in cheek, but you are embedding the context of what the founders were, anticipating, or their intent was, into your argument.
Right, and I think, and I do believe this comes from a place of people on the left kind of having a tenuous relationship with, colonial America, which I completely understand. But I think it is important to know that conservatives have so much of their identity in this kind of unidentifiable, nebulous concept of what early America was. But you can look at historical documents and conversations that these people who are touted as gods were having when they were drafting these documents, which speak in complete antithesis to how Republicans view these amendments and the laws that were being written at that time. And so I just want to, encourage people to be aware of that history and also use it when they're talking to people who don't know the history but pretend or think that they do, because it benefits us to be aware of where we came from and how those laws were drafted in the first place if we intend to use them to, put legislation forth that would restrict gun ownership in a positive way. But yeah, I just wanted to give kind of a call to arms in some historical context.
Appreciate it, Justin. I appreciate the context. That's helpful.
All right. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure. Have a good one. Bye.
Also, shout out to our clever PhD listeners.
Yes, we love that. Let's watch this this Abby Martin clip here. We'll do that now. What number is this on the sound sheet? 7? No. Wait, I am on yesterday's, I think. Okay, here we go. So Abby Martin is somehow still let into these events. Like, for self-preservation, I'm happy she's there. I'm thrilled she's there. But it is amazing to me how this happens, I feel like, every year or every few months. Abby Martin is able to ask a biting question to one of our government officials about the blatant hypocrisy of our foreign policy and our approach to countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia. And here she is at the ASU California Center on this Journalistic Freedom Conference where Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, was speaking. And she gets to ask him a question, and it's a good one.
And actually, I think she I don't know if she's even asked or she just jumps in here.
Oh, well, right.
Secretary Blinken, what about Shireen Abu Akleh? She was murdered by Israeli forces, right? CNN just agreed to this. These are your two greatest allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Israel. They have murdered American journalists, and there have been absolutely no repercussions. And you're sitting up here talking about the freedom of press and democracy. The United States is denying sovereignty to tens of millions of people around the world with draconian sanctions for electing leaders that you do not like. Why is there no accountability for Israel or Saudi Arabia for murdering journalists? It is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist in Palestine.
I deplore the loss of Shireen. She was a remarkable journalist, an American citizen, as you all know.
Yeah.
And there too. We're determined to follow the facts and get to the truth
Facts
of
have
what
been
happened.
found, Secretary Blinken, with
No,
all due
they've not
respect.
been, no,
With all due
I'm sorry, with
respect. It is
respect, they have not yet been
conclusive.
established.
Yes,
We're
it
looking
has.
for, no, they've not. We were looking for an independent, credible investigation. When that investigation happens, we will follow the facts wherever they lead. It's as straightforward as that.
But pause
That has
it
not
for a
yet
sec.
happened, but it's something that we very much want to see happen.
Okay.
And we'll have time after
Thank
the
you.
panel, of course.
All right, I thought there was a little bit more to that. There is no possibility for a credible investigation because, as was asked of Ned Price a few weeks ago by the AP journalist Matt Lee, there's no way for the Palestinians to have proportionate representation in what will be a rigged kangaroo court process held by the Israeli government. I mean, Abby just killed it there, and she kept going at him. And like when he adds that Shireen Abu Akleh was an American citizen there, like Jamal Khashoggi was a dissident who lived here in the United States. There is seemingly nothing that Israel or Saudi Arabia could do to one of our own or people that are in our orbit that would change this posture towards both of those countries. We have a relationship with them that is, in their opinion, strategic, and so there will be zero accountability for it.
And we've seen this before. I mean, Rachel Corrie, I mentioned her a few months ago. She was the young 18-year-old activist in Palestine, an American young woman who was mysteriously run over by a bulldozer in the occupied territory.
So mysterious.
And you know that so-called independent investigation into the you know who's probably going to be doing that, and that's what whose word they're going to take, the Israeli military, who also said for Rachel Corrie it was an accident, she was just in the way.
Yeah,
well, that's why this is lies. Like the independent investigation, we know, like there are investigations that have been done. I mean, CNN, Abby mentions Bellingcat, which is basically like a one step removed from Western intelligence, also says it was Israel. So and
it was obvious from from the way that you could see the angle, the ballistics, the fact that it was a sniper, she was wearing a press vest. It's conclusive.
And you can be damn sure that if CNN or Bellingcat made conclusions about like Palestinians doing something, that there wouldn't be this much hemming and hawing over. Oh, we need a different independent.
Yeah.
Like, what are those? Like maybe like just address, is CNN not an independent outlet? Like what statement are you making about the American media there? I thought Trump was the only one that does stuff like that.
At the Press Freedom Conference, interesting.
And Blinken can't even define really what the independent investigation would be, because it's not going to be one that's credible.
And I mean, I love that she drew that comparison between Jamal Khashoggi and Shireen Abu Akleh, because I made that actual comparison on Twitter and I was criticized. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. In terms of our relationship with Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, Biden said, as Bradley pointed out yesterday, we're going to make Saudi Arabia a pariah. And he's about to go to Saudi Arabia to hobnob with MBS and say, please just give us your oil in a few weeks. So there is a comparison there. Both of our relationships with Israel and Saudi Arabia are entirely contrary to the flowery notions that are espoused by people like Blinken and Biden about our relationship with press freedom and democracy all over the world, which is just, it's fanciful in and of itself, given our own human rights record. But it is incredibly valuable to make that connection and to call it out, because, as Abby mentioned, journalists are getting killed way too regularly, I should say, honestly, in Palestine. And the United States has not updated our relationship. They just waited out this PR issue for them, which is limited, honestly, frankly, given our media's coverage of Israel, Palestine. And that was that. And so he has no real answer for that. And she illustrated that well.
Someone tried to tell you that there was that to not conflate those two, those two cases. I mean, that's as in Khashoggi's killing was worse somehow. I'm assuming, thinking that was the right. Unbelievable. And funny thing is too, I think they're absolutely equivalent in terms of bringing them both up. But even if you don't, the way that people in this country, and I don't agree with this because I think human beings are human beings regardless, but the way most people in this country look at it is American citizens come first, right? And one was an American citizen, even by that backward standpoint, and it wasn't Khashoggi.
I definitely. I was going to say I agree with Emma as well. I mean, I think it's important to make that comparison and to draw that direct connection, because a big reason, like you were saying, for why, we are supposedly giving large sums of American money to Israel is because they represent some sort of unique democratic opportunity and haven in the Middle East, and it's important to both recognize not only that our interference in the Middle East has led to multiple democracies collapsing and being overturned and couped, but also they don't even at this moment represent anything other than an apartheid state for, the Palestinians living there. And so, making sure that we draw these direct connections between one brutal, dictatorship and another brutal apartheid state is just, rip the veil off of what is essentially a propaganda campaign. And all Blinken is hoping for is that, like, it's buried by a news cycle. That by the time, like Israel's investigation into their own shooting of a journalist is, finished, it'll be like, we'll be deep in the midterms. We won't be able to talk about that. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And that's just the way our media works. But I think, Matt's point is, important. You got to hammer home that, like, American life is just not worth what a lot of Americans think it is, because that's also a key factor of how people understand our imperialism, that we have to go over there to protect over here because American life is somehow uniquely worthwhile. And if, the pandemic didn't prove that to be a lie, and at least in like the eyes of our government, then certainly continued killings of American or American affiliated journalists abroad should, you would hope, continue to make cracks in that sort of narrative.
100%.
All right.
Let's do one more clip, and then we'll take one call and read some IMs, and then we'll get out of here.
Can we do the Dennis Prager clip? I saw it on the sheet. I don't know what you were going to say. If it's more important, please. I haven't seen it yet.
What's the Dennis Prager one? I haven't seen that one. The one I was. You think
the
I'll like
anti-baby
it?
one. I don't know how many you have, but the anti-baby one is what jumped out to me.
Can I just give a little context to this clip?
Sure.
Please.
So I put it on because this has nothing to do with anything. It's just it's just shocking. For some reason, Dennis Prager, I believe last night in Beverly Hills, had a debate with an Orthodox rabbi, and over the concept of like free will and also like whether human beings are innately good. And so yes, so this is him teeing this debate up about what he disagrees with in terms of Orthodox Jews about the innate goodness of people, and then he starts talking about babies.
I knew that people were not basically good, I would say by 5th grade, because I had a religious education. The only reason that I am even doing this debate is that the individual that I am debating is an Orthodox rabbi, and it is very depressing to me when traditional Jews or Christians take on beliefs that have nothing to do with the religion.
Pause it for a sec.
It's depressing.
Is he someone to speak for Jewish people? I mean, like the casual way in which like Christian fundamentalists or people that speak for Christian fundamentalists like bring in Jewish people into their own fold, because like really it's just about the end game of the rapture. Is like the arrogance of that is fascinating to me. I also love that He figured it out in 5th grade when he got a swirly, I would imagine, from a bully.
People suck.
No one's inherently good.
Just to update you on Prager's religiosity, he left modern Orthodox Judaism, but he maintained many traditional Jewish practices.
Oh, I didn't realize he was Jewish.
Neither did I.
Okay, so
Very
either way, that is representative of sometimes how conservatives link the two.
No, there's that Venn diagram of like the evangelical conservatives and Orthodox Judaism in terms of like you said, the end game of like everyone returning to Israel and participating in the rapture. Yeah.
It's depressing, actually. For an Orthodox rabbi to argue that people are basically good is quite remarkable. By the way, for the record, I have never once in my life said people are basically evil. However, God did say, Orthodox rabbis take God seriously.
Why is he self-soothing
seriously
with his hands?
As do evangelical Christians and traditional Catholics and Mormons. And that is where God says, I think it's 8:21, Genesis, the will of man's heart is towards evil from his youth. It's not from birth, because you're neither good nor bad at birth. It's almost absurd to speak of good or bad babies, but it's just, remember, it's absurd to speak of good babies. Babies are not kind. Babies are not murderers, not rapists, but they're not kind. They're pure narcissism. All of life exists for them.
Wow. That was depressing. I'm not even a big baby guy, but that was a little bit much,
Dennis Prager boldly anti-baby.
I just think it's so fascinating because I knew that he was that he had a Jewish upbringing, but that sounds much more like evangelical Christianity, and it's just like this evangelical Christianity in America. I just think of Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson, real just sadomasochistic shit. Everyone's evil, we all have to suffer except for people
You're born
rich,
sinful and you have to repent your entire life. That is a very, what is that, Lutheranism? Which one is that?
It's definitely it's a lot of things.
Some form of Protestantism, yeah.
But it's all been mixed into one big bowl to be, I guess also snake handling, to be American evangelical tradition, which in a lot of ways is meant to enforce and I guess put a religious coating over our capitalistic or neoliberal society. But it's really funny to hear babies aren't good,
Babies are narcissists. They're pure narcissism. They don't think of anybody else. They don't even get me a gift.
A baby has never been a small business owner. A baby has never provided a job for a single mother who's needed it. I mean, maybe, I guess. I don't know. It's how you define motherhood. Motherhood is a job. So I guess a baby has provided one. Okay, so maybe babies are job creators. I don't know why Dennis Prager has come up. I mean, one at a time.
This is
He's been on this for a while, apparently. I just searched up this Dennis Prager argument on babies, and from March 31st, 2014, are people born good? And in the description, take babies. Babies are lovable and innocent, but they are not good. They are entirely self-centered, as they have to be in order to survive. And then he puts quotes here. I want mommy. I want milk. I want to be held. I want to be comforted.
So this is all some big fetish
all
thing.
These things immediately, I will ruin your life.
He's so resentful.
That's narcissism.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, it's just, it's people have to be born bad if you justify that they have to go through suffering in order to meet some kind of their potential either on earth or in heaven, that suffering is necessary. So I mean, if babies are born good, that automatically presumes why don't we feed them? Why doesn't society guarantee a basic level of standard and care so that every baby can continue to be good? Instead, it's if that baby is suffering, then maybe that'll strengthen it in the eyes of Christ.
This actually is, I think, the fundamental question of politics that really decides where you end up. Is, do you think your fellow man is good or bad? And for conservatives and Prager, it's bad. So it's do I trust you to have control of your body autonomy in terms of abortions? No, we need to control you because people are bad. Same with we need to stop. We need to get conservative judges to protect kids from puberty blockers because we can't trust people because people are bad, and all this distrust is fundamentally it's anti-human, and that's where conservative politics comes from.
Well, and then also you need to be compelled to work because because the suffering of your low-wage job is actually going to make you a better person. But it is interesting when conservative values in that way come into conflict, because if people are inherently bad and babies are inherently narcissists, shouldn't they be in favor of murdering them? I don't know.
I mean, they are, but that's only after they come out of the womb
abortion.
and they've shown.
Oh yeah, you can't you can't pre-murder a baby, but once they come out, you can murder them.
You can't tell how evil they are until they're out of the womb. And that's definitely what the flap test in the delivery room is for.
It's if you have an innie or an outie. That's how they determine it.
Well, I was gonna say, our society is just very punitive. We just fundamentally we have a very punitive society. You can relate it back to Protestantism. You can relate it back to a lot of things. But we accept that people require punishment. Whether they transgress or not. And so the idea of inherently evil people is meant to be the ultimate justification for why everything from people should be given the death penalty to like why there should be overdraft fees when you happen to go over your checking accounts like balance, because people just need that. Otherwise they would fall into sin or fall into depravity or fall into laziness. You hear it all the time from like, the takers and the makers. That kind of philosophy is just pervasive in our society, that people are like fall into slovenliness without like the whip.
I love the word slovenliness. All right, I want to do one more clip. One more clip, I swear. It's that Blaze TV thing. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Well, I also wanted to. I was wondering really quick on the David Prager thing. He's Jewish, right? That's what he said, right?
We just found that out. Yeah.
Right. This is interesting. His argument is basically like original sin, right? The Christian idea that all people. Judaism rejects the idea of original sin. Apparently, I did not. I'm not.
But
that's where he disagrees with the rabbi. That's where he disagrees with the rabbi about what Judaism is about. He thinks that they should incorporate.
Right, but he said that he doesn't like when people opine about things that have nothing to do with the religion. But that's him, not the rabbi.
I know.
The rabbi is actually sharing Jewish doctrine.
Right. But okay, let's do this Blaze TV thing, and then we'll I don't know if we'll have time. You know what, guys? I'm sorry, we're not gonna have time for another call because I really wanted to get to this clip. So many apologies. I'm turning on the voicemail. I think this is wait, hold on. Yeah, this is the one. So here is Blaze TV's Isabella Riley. And I believe that Isabella Riley had something to do with, and can you confirm this, the drag sting operation?
Yeah, she was one of the people who went in.
Right.
Yeah. And reported on it and took video and stuff like that from a right-wing perspective to stoke this ridiculous moral panic that came out because, a bunch of parents decided, by the way, really want to stress that parents decided, right-wing doctrine right there.
Parental choice.
Yes. Parents decided to take their children to what was like a PG-rated drag show during the daytime.
It was a talent
Pride.
competition, and there's dancing and costumes. I said on the show the other day, it's like the equivalent of taking your kid to a Broadway play, but because it's a drag show, there's got to be like a moral panic about it, as you say. And I tweeted about it. I'm being called a groomer. Probably
got it. Trust me, I got it.
I'm sure you got it too. Like this is the latest just escalation of the anti-trans, anti-gay rhetoric in this country. Exposing your kids to gay people or trans people is the equivalent of grooming them like you're a pedophile. And here is Blaze TV's Isabella Riley, who went undercover at the voluntary kids talent drag show in Dallas, speaking about grooming and sexual abuse, and claiming that if you were a victim of sexual abuse, if you were groomed, then maybe you should be locked up because you might become a groomer / abuser in the future.
So when they're honest, they'll concede it, but they'll have to dress it down. No, I was just like born like this. Nothing bad happened to me. I swear, nothing bad happened. I just am like this because this is how God made me. It's a total code.
Should we lock up people that have had sexual trauma in their childhood because they tend to become abusers in the future?
Well, statistically, that's like they say that it's not really true, that abuse patterns don't continue. And maybe in sexual capacity it does, but like with, physical abuse or things like that, because if that did happen, then over society it would repeat and repeat and repeat, and then everybody would be abused. So I don't think that's true. I do think that we should bring back some form of institutionalizing people who are out of their mind to clean up our homeless problem.
We jail the most people of any nation on earth.
Yep.
But I think that we do need to get these people help, or at least shame them into wanting to get their own help.
I like shame more than helping them, to be honest.
I've been saying the shame thing forever. Healthy levels of shame needs to be brought back to society. I think I said it on here 20 million times. Shame serves a purpose. It's a driver for action.
At you guys. Shame.
I really, really appreciate them saying multiple parts of that out loud. It's bookended, honestly. One, they want to shame gay people or trans people into either suicide or being back in the closet so they don't have to think about them anymore. And they just were explicit about it there, too. Also the added bonus of let's lock up more homeless people for the crime of being homeless. And at the beginning, though, that host there says, the male host, he says that basically they say we were born this way. But really, you know, they're the victims of grooming, probably,
abuse, yeah.
and of abuse. So what that means is they're claiming they're protecting children from abuse. But yet, if you do end up getting victimized, it's kind of your fault, and we might preemptively institutionalize you so you don't do it to other people. What they're saying here is that gay people should be in institutions and trans people should be in institutions.
Going back to the good old days of American healthcare and American social problem solutions. I mean, it's just striking how many shows
out too. I mean, we should even broaden. Sorry, but I just want to say we should even broaden that out too. I mean, they literally said anyone who is sexually abused. That doesn't just mean, you know, people in the LGBTQ community. They want literally anyone who had some sort of trauma as a child to be locked up. That's what she was saying. Go ahead, Brandon. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, it's striking. I'm just amazed at how many shows there are like this out there where like just like indistinguishably like interchangeable hosts say like the worst things you could possibly think of and then tell you like that if you call them an asshole online that you're trying to cancel them or you're not open to free speech. It's just like a very good grift. But, you know, I would imagine that they're just generally not sympathetic to abuse. Like, you know, we saw from the right wing during the Me Too movement and any subsequent abuse, you know, in kind of airing we've had about abuse regarding like Kavanaugh, et cetera, in the past recent years, that they're just, you know, not open to it. So I think that this is just another like arrow in that quiver of disliking people who, you know, even speak out against abuse, because within like their, you know, right wing doctrine, like women can't be abused by men because they're the property of men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's funny, too, that you don't really hear much about the institutions that they undoubtedly support, like the church, which has systematically presided over and covered up abuse of children for decades and decades and decades. That is like a real engine of child abuse and pedophilia in this country. And
shows like this will still have on like Matt Gaetz and still be like, well, you can't, I don't want to prejudge Matt Gaetz. He just has a case out against him. But like if they see a drag show, like they're able to discern with their like pedophile senses whether or not it's whether or not someone's being groomed there. It's very, you know, it's very stark how willing they are to speak out of both sides of their mouth in pursuit of like the most graven future for all of us.
Yeah. Also, if we bring shame back, there might be a lot more comments about Isabella's makeup, but I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, move on.
As someone who's notably like I hate makeup and I'm bad at it, I feel free. She deserves it.
I mean, she's got like you go on her Instagram. She's got like a red stripe down the middle of her face. It's
contouring gone bad.
Everyone's going with the Elizabeth Holmes thing now. That's what's hot. It's what's popping in the streets. You've shown yourself to not be like with it anymore, Matt.
It's like she puts a piece of paper over her chin and her forehead, and someone just sprays paints the middle of her face. But...
Speaking of the double speak from these guys too, one of the conservatives who called me a groomer because I was defending the idea that you can take a child to a drag show as a parent, and he called me a groomer. And this is James Lindsay, the CRT guy who's probably most well known for going on the Dr. Phil show and looking like he was about to cry while blabbing on about how CRT is the bad. Well, he actually has a picture of him hanging out with Nikki Klein, the former Battlestar Galactica actress who was part of the Nexum sex cult, whose leader, Keith Raniere, Nexium, yeah, whatever they were called. The NXIVM. I forgot how you pronounce it.
Nexium.
It's Nexium.
I thought it was an Nexium. I watched the whole like documentary about it.
Oh, really? Well, then I'm
because it's pronounced really like. I mean, I might be wrong. I watched the whole like documentary and then like the Lifetime movie because like I was into Smallville and Allison Mack was involved. So
I was also into Smallville. Yes.
Right. Well, you know, he's hanging out with Nikki Klein, and who also, by the way, she wasn't just a member of the sex cult. She's out there still to this day. Defending the leader of the cult, Keith Raniere, who is in jail. I believe he's been sentenced to 120 years for a myriad of different abuse charges, including sex trafficking and sexual abuse of a child. But yeah, talk about projection, right? These are the guys who are out there calling people groomers, yet they're literally hanging out with people who are part of sex cults that abuse children.
I'm gonna read I was just gonna let's read I'm having an issue with my earpiece, so let's just read 5-6 more IMs and then we're gonna get out of here. Is that cool?
Yeah.
All right, guys. Murray the York. It's next EM. I was right.
I don't believe it. Fake news.
Fake news. Tom Low Fink. Hey, happy Emma Majority Day. Commiserations about the Rangers result on Tuesday, Emma. If you need an uplifting sports moment, I would recommend watching the clip of Nelson Mandela presenting the Rugby World Cup trophy to then South Africa men's rugby team captain Francois Pinnier in 1995. There's also photographs of their handshake, which is considered to be one of the most iconic moments in the history of rugby. It's one of the reasons that Pinnier is revered by rugby fans all over the world. I'll check it out. Kowalski from Nebraska. Howdy, Millennial Majority Report. Yesterday when Bradley said he couldn't get into sports betting because he couldn't handle the loss, I have some advice to put you in a good headspace. Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on. Go play. Hey now, you're a rock star. Get the show on. Get paid. All that glitters is gold. Only shooting stars break the mold. Thank you, Kowalski.
He's right.
My only hope is that Emma read that out loud. Danarchy, you're welcome. There you go. Your left testicle. Thank you. Emma, you were thinking of John Calvin and Calvinism. He was an awful man who basically outlined modern evangelical Protestant values in America. Charity is bad, wealth is a blessing, etc. Yes, that was what I was thinking of. Just a few more. Emotional support hamster. Does this mean babies grow into evil youth when they kick over their sister's block tower? Huh? I don't get what that was. Kowalski. It doesn't seem like it is actually Kowalski. Howdy, my fellow John Brown congregation. Emma, you missed out on my offer Tuesday to send fresh Rocky Mountain oysters to the office. Oh, this is Kowalski? He has 2 different usernames. Lek, Bradley, and Sam said no thanks. Do they speak for you too? I love oysters.
Emma.
It's not.
Rocky Mountain oysters are bull testicles fried. Yeah. And they're a delicacy in Midwestern and plain states.
I had the same reaction. I said, I love oysters too, but I wouldn't want them to be shipped here.
Yeah, the idea of no, I don't want bull testicles, Kowalski. Thank you. Thank you.
But what confused me was, the name Rocky Mountain. Where the fuck are these oysters coming from in the Rocky Mountain?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Another vegan meat
some great
trend.
brooks in Colorado in the Rocky Mountains.
I believe it comes from you're moving across the plains with bulls pulling your carts and stuff like that. And
gotcha.
Yeah.
And the final IM of the day. Neutrino chirality is best. I have occasionally tried to call in to discuss the similarities between how college athletes are told to accept no monetary compensation because it's, quote, their dream job, and discuss how that kind of pressure is similarly used for other jobs. I'm a grad student, yep, and we do most of the grunt work to keep things moving, but we get paid very little. And I know that people working in video games regularly get shamed for complaining about salaries because, quote, making video games is a dream job. And it applies to this industry, too.
Entertainment is especially bad with that, too.
It's all bullshit meant to keep people from being paid for their full value of their labor and needs to be shut down whenever invoked. 100%. All right, guys.
It divides the working class. It's meant to divide the working class. Another hierarchy, like when you divide yourself from people deliver your food.
All right, guys. Great show. I got to fix this earpiece. See you all tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick made for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.